Motocross Championship for the Sega 32X. Yeah, that's right, this thing you see before you is not a subpar quality video game for just the Sega Genesis, oh no! This bad boy requires the mushroom-shaped expansion module with its extra wire and its extra power adapter for good measure. Why? Why? You look at this thing? This didn't need to be on 32X. You could have done this on the Mega Drive. Hell, you could have done this on the Master System. Though with some respect, I'd imagine a lot of the racers on those consoles are overall much better games than Motocross Championship, but we're jumping ahead here. You have two main modes of play in Motocross Championship. Practice, where you can choose to play a single race on one of the game's 12 tracks, and with one of the game's 3 bikes, still technically the same bike, just different speeds. Or you could play the season mode and race through all 12 tracks and earn cash and stuff, I guess. In any event, you race against other racers through various tracks, not only making a fair attempt at pulling off stunts that won't land you on your posterior, but also attempt to fend off against a barrage of racers that will want nothing more than your head under their wheels. Which, all things considered, isn't that difficult to pull off because more often than not, each race starts with all 12 racers literally piling up on top of each other in an ugly heap. And I mean that almost literally. Every race I start, all the bikes are just fumbling over each other and falling apart, and it takes a good long while to get a good groove or feel for the game going. That's assuming you get it at all, of course. To put a fine point to it, Motocross Championship is simply depressing to play. Clearly they were trying to go for a combination of a traditional run a couple laps and try to finish first racer, along with a couple stunt work thrown in for good measure, as well as a dash of road rash due to the ability to punch and kick other racers. And I can appreciate the concept if it was done well, but this isn't done well. If anything, it's done rather poorly, especially if this is the visual that begins each race. So not only are you focused on trying to win the race and keep your balance while riding over slopes and avoiding puddles, but you're also trying to avoid complete idiots from piling up on you, and the end result is piles of frustration in an attempt to win a race. And, well, look, you win a race or place in second or third, you get money, and if you're playing the season mode, you're moving on to the next track and you get a password, a somewhat convoluted password featuring upper and lowercase letters, as well as quotation marks and having to scroll through the letters individually. Considering the endgame of season mode, might as well stick with practice and play the tracks on your leisure. That's probably the best way to approach Motocross Championship, aside from not approaching it at all to begin with, but here's the funny thing, your motorbike thing, the available in 3 classes including a super fast superbike thing, actually does control relatively well. You push a button, it'll perform an action like acceleration or braking or attack. You could manipulate the bike's positioning and suspension so you could make proper landings after a particularly high jump or something. I wouldn't call it tight controls or slick or anything within the realm of reliable, but it's not completely worthless. Well, attacking is worthless, especially trying to aim your attacks, but then attacking is worthless one way or another, so I don't see the issue there. Control does feel a bit slippery and at times prone to sudden turns that you didn't intend on doing, but it is somewhat workable after a somewhat lengthy learning curve. I could tell you that once I got a feel for the controls, it wasn't completely worthless, and I found myself actually having a bit of fun with it, but then I got bored rather quickly because despite there being 12 tracks of varying length, difficulty, and lap requirements, all these tracks feel exactly the same. They all share the same 4 backgrounds, the same 2 shades of dirt roads, the same obstacles. There's nothing really unique among them to be found here. Difficulty more than anything has less to do with challenge and more to do with the camera, the sudden popping up of obstacles and puddles as well as some terrain, which means unless you have the tracks memorized, you'll be easily caught off guard, and even then you'll still have to contend with the dozen idiots that will pop up or behind you and just be a lump of coal on your way to, I don't know, something. First place, the goal, whatever it is. Visuals are muddy, pixelated, and looks like dog vomit, especially when a bunch of bikes are piling up on each other. The racers themselves are equally unappealing to look at, all the tracks look the same, which I guess makes sense considering the subject matter. I suppose the scaling when it comes to the terrain and maybe some of the objects is okay, perhaps adequate to even... I can't even get myself to say it to justify a 32X. I try, but I can't think of anything good to look at. I look at the visuals before me, I'm looking at video diarrhea. I look at terrain popping in literally milliseconds before they become relevant, which often means running into a mud puddle milliseconds before they appear on screen. I look at a playing screen that takes up only 2/3 of the screen, while the other third is occupied by the obnoxious looking heads-up display that says next to nothing, or the loud, totally dated splash screen that is indicative of trying to be hip with the cool kids of 1994 or something. I would suggest any kid caught playing this game in 1994 or beyond automatically loses all semblance of cool points for the next 20 years or so, but I digress. Oh yeah, I forgot. Motocross Championship allows for 2-player split screen. I haven't been able to test this with anybody because quite frankly I'm not that stupid enough, but here's a screenshot of the 2-player gameplay for anyone curious. Yeah, have fun with that. That is exactly what you get. As far as sound is concerned, well, I'd want to say that the game has a decent soundtrack on par with most generic sounding Genesis games. I want to say that this game has decent tunes that you could jam to, or a good collection of sound effects to go along with the action. I want to say the game has solid voice bites. I want to say all those things and actually mean it, but I simply can't. Motocross Championship has so-so music, I'm being generous there by the way. Sound effects are less than stellar, I'm being extremely generous in that regard. And their 1 or 2 voice bites used here are meh at best. Kind of stretching it there too. There's not enough for me to say here or invest any kind of deep thought into it. And that's pretty much the whole game in a nutshell. Motocross Championship falls apart and fumbles to the point where it feels like a waste of time to invest any effort into it. It's lacking in variety, it's lacking in polish, it's lacking in purpose. Controls are functional at best, and even that's a bit of a stretch, but everything around that is just a bunch of rubbish. This is low quality dreck by Mega Drive standards, and yet somehow this needed to be on Sega 32X. A mushroom shaped expansion module, a second power supply, and an additional cable was required to play something as unremarkably uninspired as this. And perhaps that, more than anything, is what makes Motocross Championship such a bad game. If this were on Sega Genesis, it'd be another in a long line of somewhat mediocre titles that would be long forgotten and only brought up as a mild curiosity piece for a website or something. But on a format with a rather small library and a rather sad reputation garnered over the years, Motocross Championship is vintage snake oil in cartridge form. Oh well. I guess it's back to Shadow Squadron for me.